Welcome, all the football fans out in South Dakota. I'm Jason Andera, Midco Sports, joined by Mike McCleary of Argus Leader. And you come back this year a lot different than last year, Michael. You've got experience covering high school football in South Dakota now. How does it feel?
Yeah, I just said I didn't have to use my GPS getting over here. So it was, it's going to be fun. I feel a lot more well-equipped to handle the season, and it's going to be a cool season.
And you've spent some time talking to coaches and finding out what's going on the inside, and that's why we're here on Football Insiders to break it all down. And I hate long intros, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about 11 AAA football. And right off the bat, if you look at the rankings that came out from the media poll, the top 4 teams all play each other coming up on Saturday. Pretty good start to the season, right, Michael?
Yeah, it's you sort of see these matchups pretty early because you get the bowl games pretty early on in the season, and then the President's Bowl week 3. So with those big schools, those big teams playing, like these schedules are sort of naturally fitting. But just with how the rankings and the preseason stuff, obviously stuff can move around now. But just ended up making for a good first week.
Great games right off the bat, and let's start by looking at the rankings and how they came out in the media poll, and maybe how we reacted to those, whether we agree or disagree. Let's look at number 1, Brandon Valley, and they don't pop off the page. 1 returning starter on defense, some new pieces that they got to fit in, but a couple of all-state linemen return up front, and Lucas Slack back at quarterback. They feel like they have the pieces, and I voted them number 1 because I think they have enough depth on defense to replenish, and they really do have one of the best lines in the state.
Yeah, and I voted them number 1 too. I think that even if their run game isn't what it was last year with Jordan Johnson, I think they could pass the ball pretty well this year with Lucas Slack, and they got some really talented receivers too.
Really
and potentially the best line in, if not the state, the class. So that's always a reason to bet on Brandon Valley, and I think that's an every year thing for them.
Yeah, Andrew Bunker's back up front for them. Navarro Shunky, their All-State junior, is not going to start the season out with them, but he will come back at some point, coming off of a back injury from the wrestling season that he's still resting. But that's some news out of Brandon Valley, and I really expect Delvon Spears-Whitty to really step into that role at running back and be one of the top running backs in the state. So it's not always about returning starters, especially in AAA. These guys are ready to get their chance, and we both like Brandon Valley at number 1. Number 2 in the polls, Harrisburg comes in, and of course they're the state champs, and they've got 156 kids out for football. There's bound to be some talent from the Tigers this year.
Yeah, and their defense is pretty solid too. They have a lot of people who cycled in late in the season, and obviously they pitched the shutout in the state championship game. So even though they're losing a lot of those big contributors, they still have a pretty decent foundation there. So they expect they're going to be able to defend really well early in the season, and then their offense will be a bit of a work in progress, but it helps in that work in progress when you got maybe the best running back in the state in Gavin Ross.
Yeah. When you start with Gavin Ross, things are going to go well. They do miss all 5 starters from last year's offensive line and their quarterback who went to the Big Ten. When you say that, it sounds pretty dramatic. But I'll tell you what, they've got some big boys ready to take up the line spots. And Dylan Elrod is going to shuffle in at quarterback at least part of the time. And there's always a quarterback competition. And I think there's going to be some packages with different quarterbacks as far as what Brandon White is trying to plan. But Dylan Elrod, I watched him in practice. He looked fantastic. He looked ready to play varsity, but it's different when the bullets start flying for real. He's got some weapons with Titan Tryon and some different guys. I think they've got plenty of talent. I think this is going to be a work in progress, though. We'll see how Harrisburg does, if they're a top 2 team right off the bat or not.
Yeah, and something that Brandon White said, was the main thing that he's really working on, Dylan, right at this point of the season is just his footwork. And, that puts a lot of emphasis on the line, where if the line doesn't hold up immediately, how is he going to handle the pocket? How is he going to handle those throws under pressure? And, that's something he's going to be tested on pretty early. But, like you said, there's a lot of people coming out to Harrisburg football practice. So, maybe they do have the pieces to put together a really good offensive line right away. Who knows?
Yeah, we will see. And I agree. I think their defense is ahead of their offense at this point. Number 3 in the media poll, Jefferson. Pretty much no seniors on the team last year. They had a couple, but that really affected the game. And this year, a full senior class, maybe 2 of the top playmakers in the class back on offense. This is going to be a fun team to watch.
Yeah, and I would say 3 of the top playmakers, maybe because of the addition of Nelson Wright too.
Right.
I mean,
Another all-state guy.
Yeah, I really, really like Jefferson, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and that was something that I think carried over in the last season too, because they were making plays right from the start, and then they fell off a little bit. But I feel like this senior-led group, they maybe won't have that stretch at the end of the year where they, lose track of things and suffer some injuries and can't really handle that with their depth. So I think they're going to benefit from an off season and the fact that they have everybody back. This is 2 years working with the same team, so it's going to help them.
Yeah, and Coach Benedetto also told me there's going to be less guys playing both ways. That's always a huge advantage. London Kolb, who made some great plays on offense last year, is really going to try to focus on defense now. And that defense could be really good this year. They're a lot bigger. And like you said, Nelson Wright, the all-state running back from Roosevelt, transfers to Jefferson. Maybe the one spot they were a little thin last year was running back. And this year with Gabo and Nelson Wright and a bigger offensive line, I would look for Jefferson to be really good on offense. Let's move to O'Gorman. They're the number 4 team in the rankings. Jason Poppinga always talks to us in the beginning of the year and always tells us how his line doesn't quite match up with the rest of the state, but I think the skill players do.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. With Maverick Jones at running back, and then you got so many options in the receiving game for Bennett Dannenbrink, who's probably, he could make a case for one of the best quarterbacks in the class, if not the best quarterback in the class.
You really could. I mean, stat-wise, he was actually a little better than Talon Ashley last year. I made Ashley our player of the year, but I really thought about Bennett Dannenbrink too.
Yeah, and I think they do different things well, so I think they could both excel in where it's hard to almost compare the two, but with the way that Bennett has come along making plays with his feet, maybe that type of playmaking ability can be something that's in his wheelhouse too. And obviously he's fantastic, sitting in the pocket throwing the football. So, he's going to have a bunch of options to throw to. Obviously Peyton Hagee coming back, and it's going to be fun to watch Jefferson O'Gorman on offense.
They are very young, though. I mean, this is one of the smallest senior classes O'Gorman's ever had. They've got some really good contributors there, but depth-wise, not so much. So that junior class and that sophomore class are really going to have to step up to keep O'Gorman viable in that top 4.
Yeah, and we saw that a little bit last year where they had some guys start out on the JV roster who ended up being big-time contributors on the varsity roster, Peyton Hagee being one. And, so O'Gorman's got some tricks up their sleeves that I'm sure by the end of the season they'll figure out that depth, and they'll be, the rest of their team will catch up to the talent that they have on the skill players returning.
Totally agreed. Coming in at number 5, Lincoln. And this is a team both you and I are higher on than the rest of the state. We really like Lincoln. We both voted them number 2 in the poll. 8 starters back on offense, I believe 6 on defense. And then just so much more maturity with the junior quarterback, Tate Schaefer, really assuming the role of a leader.
Yeah, and I went out to a Lincoln practice the other day, and Jack Smith, who's probably going to be Tate Schaefer's number 1 option in the receiving game, he looks really good too. He's just a bigger type receiver, going to get a lot of yards after the catch, and also going to beat a lot of people deep. So, he's going to be really, really good. They're got new people in the running game, but they got a bunch of options there. But that defense is going to be just as good as it was last year, if not better, just with the senior leadership there. Obviously, starting with Gabe Gutierrez, the linebacker, he's going to be fantastic this year. So yeah, I'm really, really high on Lincoln, and we agree on this too. I think with their defense and what we expect out of their offense, they're going to be a state championship contender pretty early in the season.
I echo everything you just said. And Sam Hinbjergen, the future UND product, playing both tight end and defense as a huge leader on this team as well. In the receiving game, I really look for Trenton Peterson to take another step up too, alongside Jack Smith. They've got a lot of receivers, and this is only going to help Tate Schaefer as he sits back. He had a few issues with turnovers, but he got better as the season went on last year. You could see the progression, and he is cool as a cucumber. That guy can sit back and lead and not get flustered. And I think if he keeps those turnovers down, he could be one of the best quarterbacks in the class.
Yeah, and he obviously threw some interceptions last year, but it didn't seem to affect him at all.
Right.
He still took those shots, and as a sophomore quarterback, that says a lot about a kid. So, we've been hearing about his maturity and just his decision making all throughout the offseason. And I think pretty early in the season is, even if he does, maybe came out taking those shots and, force some turnovers a little bit, I expect him to keep on improving. And, like you said, he has a chance to be one of the best in the class.
All right, let's take a quick look at the big games coming up in 11 AAA. And, of course, all 9 teams are in action. A lot of this is going to happen on Saturday. Friday, we've got Lincoln at Roosevelt, but Saturday, Harrisburg at Jefferson, O'Gorman at Brandon Valley. All 4 top teams playing on Saturday. And then in the Rushmore Bowl, which will be live here on Midco Sports, Washington takes on Rapid City Stevens, Sturgis at Rapid City Central. And we'll get to those top 4 teams, but we've already talked about them. Let's talk about Washington and Stevens, those 2 next team right in that tier below the top 5, and then Roosevelt as well. These are teams I feel like are not that far off the pace, and we're going to see quickly which ones are ready to make that push to be potentially ranked. I just want to mention Washington. They're going to be a little bit younger this year, a rotation at quarterback in camp up until even yesterday. I went to practice, and they didn't have a full-time starter named yet. And then Stevens has a 3-year starter at quarterback in Jed Jensen. They lost a couple of key players, but a much bigger offensive line, and they feel like the running game is going to be strong for them. I want to ask you a little bit more about Roosevelt. I know you've talked to them a little bit. Down in the seniors' numbers, but still Jackson Gravengood and their quarterback back for another year after being a sophomore. I think they take a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and head coach Kim Nelson, he loves to pass, and he's really, really impressed with Jackson Brower and how he's come along. And I think there's a lot of people on that team that maybe don't have the senior class that they used to, but they have juniors that they feel play like seniors, like Tate and Nave to be one specifically. Right. He's going to play some tight end and also, kind of man the middle of the defense for them, sort of in a quasi linebacker / safety role for them, sort of what he played last year. They got a lot of really talented players, and Kim Nelson was saying, he hopes he's right about a lot of the players that are haven't really gotten a ton of varsity experience with, because he's really having fun working with this group. And, Roosevelt could be a surprise. And, they get a really, really good early test with Lincoln.
Yeah, I don't think anybody expects much out of Roosevelt just because they are so small in the senior class and they're working in so many new players. But, don't count out Kim Nelson, the all-time winningest coach in South Dakota. Any other comments on these big games that we're going to see either Friday or Saturday night in 11 AAA?
Well, Gorman Brandon Valley is really good. That's offense versus defense there, at least the story early on. But Brandon Valley has a chance to really kind of separate themselves, especially against a really, really good O'Gorman team.
And we've seen Brandon Valley, coming out of the gates the last couple of years, they're not always at their best right away. So for them to be number 1, I think you could have named any of those top 5 teams number 1, and you really could have made a case for any of those teams. I think I see Brandon Valley being the number 1 team later in the year. I don't know. This first game is going to be a huge challenge against that explosive offense. And then Harrisburg-Jefferson in the other game, I think we're going to find out a lot about Harrisburg and how they bounce back after winning their first title in the big class. I don't know if they're a perennial favorite or if that was just a really special group. And we'll find that out, too, as most people see Jefferson as a really legit team this year. So let's look at 11 AAA. Moving to 11 AA, where last season it was Pierre and T area in the Dome. One of the best games you'll ever see at a championship game in South Dakota. And Pierre won their 5th straight title. T lost their first game of the year. Just a quick reflection on just how cool of a game that was and how it sets the tone for this season.
Yeah, I'm still kicking myself. I was watching that game from afar. We had Matt Zimmer covering that game for us. That was, I think probably the best game of the weekend last year. And talk about the kick of somebody's life. I mean, that's just an unbelievable way to end the season. I mean, I feel like T can't even really, feel too bad about that. They had a great season, and if that's going to be the way that you lose your first game, I mean, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, and as we look at the rankings here in 11 AA, Pierre and T area at the top again. This Pierre team last season, people wondered, would they be able to pull it off? Will they have enough young guys that step up? And boy, did they ever. And of course, it starts with Lincoln Keenopes.
Yeah, maybe the best quarterback in the state, probably the best quarterback in the state. I mean, he can make plays with his feet, with his arm, better than just about anybody there. So he's going to make a lot of plays this year, and I expect him to start off pretty strong early.
Yeah, I love this Pierre team. I mean, Christian Busch and Jason Michachuk up front, just some huge animals. And then, Lewis still running the ball for them, and great receivers in Jack Merkwan and Jaden Weeby and Jet Zabel. I mean, this team is loaded. I think this year you've got Pierre in a class by themselves at the top. And then I think you got a group of contenders, and that hope to be good enough to challenge Pierre by the end of the year. And I think that group includes T-Area and Yankton for sure. Those are the two teams people are talking about as potential, title contenders.
Yeah, and I've heard Brookings' name thrown around,
right.
Even Watertown sometimes.
Yeah.
With they got some really good playmakers there. So there's that group that, like you said, that's sort of just basically contending for who's going to be the person who's going to take the first shot at Pierre, and that's going to be a really tough task. I think some of these teams need to show pretty drastic improvement, throughout the first couple games of this season just to get to that point. But expect this to be Pierre's class until it isn't.
It really is. You mentioned Yankton as one of those teams that's right up there. They've got Rugby Reichenbach, and they've got a ton of athletes, Cody Oswald, and some of these guys who have really shown what they can do, but they really do need to go to another level to compete with Pierre, and they will get that opportunity. Brookings, Mitchell also making that top 5. You mentioned Watertown just outside the top 5. Aberdeen made it to the Final Four last year, getting some votes this year, but they have a new coach. And then Sturgis and Spearfist getting a little bit of love out west as well. But as we look at the big games for this week, the Saturday game, Aberdeen Central takes on Pierre. They're going to go to Pierre. It wasn't pretty when they played last year, in the regular season at least, and Pierre looks like the heavy favorite there. But as you look at the rest of the big game schedule, Huron at T-Area. Huron has a new coach. Yankton at Mitchell. That's the one with the 2 ranked teams in it. And Yankton, we know a little bit about. They got a lot of returners. Mitchell, we don't know quite as much about. And then Watertown takes on Brookings, another one where you got 2 teams that hope to be in contention late. Any reaction to any of those big games coming up in 11AA, Mike?
Well, I'm looking really, really closely. I'm Yankton, obviously in a rivalry game with Mitchell. You want to see that the strides that Rugby has made at the quarterback spot. They got a really solid team, but it was Rugby Reichen who, at the end of the season, in that T-Area game, who was almost led them back. I believe they were like,
I forgot
24 down. It was 21 down or something like that.
Yeah.
It was, he was just on another level for that game, and you want to see if maybe he can get to that level, throughout the entire season. Obviously, playoff game is a different atmosphere, but if he's made some improvements, maybe Yankton, we already have them sort of in that second tier, maybe the best shot at Pierre right now, but maybe Yankton could be right there with them.
Yeah, I know a lot of coaches believe Yankton's the number 2 team in this class, and they were very close with T-Area in the media poll as well. But a lot of love to T-Area, even though they lose some big pieces. They've got a new quarterback in Maddox Slykehouse, who they really like, and they got Chase Van Tol back. They've got Reese Kirshenman, a lot of guys who are all-state potential guys, and they've got a lot of players in that system too that can fill some spots. So I don't think T takes much of a step back this season.
New coach, though. Craig Glayberg's had a lot of success in that program, and it is technically a new regime, but I don't think that will be that much of a difference there. I'm sure they're going to play a similar way, very fast, very explosive, and they got the playmakers to do it.
All right, let's look at 11AA. On to Class 11A. Here's a look at the rankings, how they came out in the media poll earlier this week. It's Madison at number 1, garnering 11 first-place votes. And then West Central, Canton, Del Rapids, Dakota Valley, a lot of familiar names here. And even those teams receiving votes, Millbank, Beersford, Lennox, Sioux Falls Christian, Vermilion, a lot of people voting for them too. So this, as it was last year, it's going to be a wide-open class, even though Madison really took this class by storm last season, but it really feels like a lot of parity this year in 11A. Any reactions to the rankings that came out, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see the arguments for a lot of those teams. I have some different picks. Obviously, they're pretty close in the polls. We got Beersford and Sioux Falls Christian. Those actually swapped were my 4 and 5 teams.
I like both of those teams, and they're not in the top 5 right now, but Beersford, they put a show on in 11B last year, move up to 11A, but have a lot of those guys back this season.
Yeah, and I don't really know what the difference would be in terms of the class change. But, obviously with the returners that they have and just the historic season that they're coming off of, I mean, they hadn't won a playoff game, was it like in however many years?
I forgot the number, but it was huge.
Yeah, it was a very big number. It's been a very long time since they won a playoff game, and they won 2 last year. So that's obviously going to be a big momentum boost going into a season with a bunch of returners. So I really like Beersford going into the year.
Yeah, my reaction as I look at it, Madison at the top. I didn't even vote for Madison in the top 5, but they garnered the most votes because they're coming off an undefeated season. But no Max Hodgin. I mean, normally it's not a big deal when you switch from a longtime assistant to a head coach. I think there is a little bit of a big deal there, not only coaching-wise but talent-wise. I think the team isn't as deep as they have been in the past, but we'll see. New quarterback, new coach, a couple guys back in the backfield, a much different line. I think Madison might take a while to get back to the top. I love West Central and Canton. I personally have Canton as my top team. I think they've got the best defense in the class and enough playmakers on offense to make things go. So I really like Canton. But West Central, they've got a claim there too with 8 starters back, I believe, on offense. A team that they could do a lot of different things too, and Justin Zerpel just makes things go for them. So I think this will be a lot of fluctuation in this class this year.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of really good things about the sides in their offensive line, but I've heard the same things about Sioux Falls Christian too. Where they got 16 starters returning. I'm not sure what the breakdown on each side of the ball is, but it's 16 total.
Yeah.
And obviously they have Tate Snyder coming back at quarterback, who played the first 5 games of the season last year. And played really well. He runs the ball a lot, and he feels like he's come a long way with his passing. So they don't have quite the speed that they had last year, but at the running back spot. But I think that with how they think that they're going to pass the ball and the sort of option game with Tate Snyder at the quarterback, I mean I think they have a chance to be pretty good this year.
Yeah, let's take a look at some of these big games. And I think there's 3 really big games to look at coming out of the chute here. And Del Rapids takes on Madison. We're going to find out quickly because Del Rapids comes back, and they have a lot of changeover too. But Braden Panconen, the All-State defensive back, is back for them. They feel like they've got some pieces that can make some noise. And they take on that number 1 team out of the chute that has a lot of question marks in Madison. Another good one to talk about, Canton takes on Sioux Falls Christian. A lot of people like you are high on Sioux Falls Christian, and I'm high on Canton, so this could be a lot of fun to see which direction these teams go. And then I think Dakota Valley at Vermilion. I personally voted Vermilion in my top 5. I think they're a team that will pick up where they left off last year with a lot of growth. New quarterback in Ty Hertz, who Coach O'Boyle really likes, and Zone Robinson, just an electric playmaker on the outside. I think they've got the pieces to make things happen. And Dakota Valley, they were down last year. I think they're back. People think they're back up. Top 5, we'll see. They got a tough draw with Vermilion. But any reactions to your thoughts on this first slate of games on Friday night?
Well, we mentioned Beersford earlier, but the opponent that they got this week, Millbank, obviously they played in the state championship last year, and they got there via defense. They didn't score a whole bunch. I believe there was a playoff game that they won by just a touchdown, or even less than a touchdown.
Yeah, I think against Canton. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously Canton had a pretty high octane offense too. So I'm not sure what they scored, but it was either 0 or like a field goal or something like that.
It was a defensive battle for sure.
But yeah, I mean, Millbank, they lose a few guys, but you wonder if that defense sort of stays, the foundation of it stays where maybe they could sort of recreate something that they had last year.
Yeah. And just a final thought, Lennox takes on Chamberlain. I personally think Lennox is a top 5 team as well. I think Braden Wolf is going to show the state what he can do back at quarterback, and I think their line is much better than it was a year ago. So watch out for Lennox. All right, let's look at Class 11B and the 9-man football classes right now. These teams, of course, started last week already. Most of them did. There's a couple teams that had a bye. But this we've gotten a little flavor already of how some of these teams have done. And let's look at 11B in the new rankings. This is already 1 week or the second week of the 11B rankings. And as we look, no surprise, Winter at top, Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan number 2. But the other teams in the top 5, Elk Point, Jefferson, Sioux Valley, St. Thomas More, with a ton of teams receiving votes. Just your initial reaction to those rankings.
Yeah, Winter.
Yeah,
back on top again. I mean, this is sort of, it's funny. It's sort of what the rankings looked like at the beginning of last season too, with Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan, Elk Point, Jefferson, I believe was up there too. Sioux Valley. Obviously, they lose a lot of people in the passing game. With Parker Petts, and they had a really, really, really talented receiving group too.
Yeah.
So, at this point, I just feel like Winter still has a lot of what they had last year from just that absolutely dominant team. It wasn't like this wasn't any regular 12-0 team that had their struggles or anything like that. I don't think Winter tripped up once last year. So
it was pretty dominating.
So that's the story of this class, and sort of similar to Class AA. It's Winter's class until it isn't, I guess.
It really is, and I got a chance to watch Winter last week play against Tri-Valley, and Tri-Valley was receiving votes that first week. And after a quick pick 6 at the beginning of the game where Tri-Valley was up, it was a total domination by Winter. And Riley Orrell in particular had an awesome game. Aiden Barfus showed what he can do, but I really wanted to see in person how big the lines were, how good the defense, how quick they were. They were all of that. So I really like Winter at the top. Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan, I feel like maybe more like last year where they started with a few losses and maybe worked their way up by the end of the year. I think the similar thing can be said. And I think Elk Point Jefferson might be the team that's able to knock one of those top 2 teams off. I think they are really loaded with Ben Swatek and Lucas Heiser back in the backfield and Noah McDermott at quarterback. They are just starting from where they left off last season. Sioux Valley, I think, has a lot to rebuild. And St. Thomas More is the one team, if you remember a few years back, they were always in the mix in the 11B or 11A, whatever class they were in the postseason talk. And this year, I think they get back to that. They get some really good players. Easton Ogle comes over from Stevens as an All-State honorable mention player, and now he's with St. Thomas More. Lee Negebauer back at quarterback for them. Ben Larson, an All-State type of running back. Matt Larson, excuse me. So I think St. Thomas More could push one of those teams at the top. And another team receiving votes, I think Roncalli is a team that could be pushing those teams at the top. And watching Mount Vernon Plankinton last week, that's another team that really popped off the page for me, the way they played in week 1.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of really good things about Mount Vernon Plankinton and their size especially. So, that's a team that I've been watching. I believe I had them in my rankings. I had them at number 5. So, yeah, I mean, that's a team that I'm pretty high on, and a lot of people in the state are too, because they're just a few spots out of the rankings.
Yeah, as we look at the big games for this week, there are no teams that are ranked that are playing against each other. The only one that we have a battle of 2 teams that were at least receiving votes was McCook Central Montrose at Hot Springs, and the rest of those games. We'll see. There could be some upsets, but I'm looking forward to possibly an uneventful week in 11B. As we look at 9AA, let's start with the Howard Tigers. They had the absolute toughest schedule you can imagine to open the season. They start with Hanson, who was a top 5 team. I think they came in at 3 last week. And then this week take on Canastota, the number 1 team, who moved from 9AA down to 9A this year. And they just keep on rolling. So they're at number 1, Wall at number 2, Platte Geddes, the 2-time defending champs, at number 3. They get their first game this week. Hamlin at 4. Hanson, who has that 1 loss but still stays in the top 5. Reaction to those rankings, Mike?
Well, I'm really interested to see Platte Geddes without Grayson Hanson. He's just been such a, mainstay of that team for so long. But, Howard, moving up a class after a state championship dominant season last year, they had a really, really tough matchup first week with Hanson. And like you said, Hanson kept it close. I believe it was a 1-score game.
Yeah.
It's
They're very good.
I think with them at number 1, with Hanson at number 5 and Howard at number 1, it sort of shows you how close this class can be, because Hamlin obviously is going to play very well. Platte Geddes, established themselves as a really good team in the first week. And, Wall just picking up where they left off last season, where, they're just, I expect them to be a really good team throughout the season too.
Yeah, a lot of people wondering, can Howard keep it going after last year? They lost, a D1 player, Jay Syfor. They lost the Player of the Year in Ty Byer and a couple other leaders. But I visited with Howard just for a short time. I stopped at their practice last week, and I was amazed how many players came up and said, we're ahead of where we were 12 months ago. And that shows the confidence. And then they've got Taden Hoyer back at quarterback, a guy who he was a sophomore, kind of thrown in there last year. This year they feel like they're more balanced because Hoyer is able to throw the ball a little bit more, and of course we know they can run. So I think Howard is really a good team in this class. But don't forget about Wall. Wall got a 1 first place vote, ton of talent back on this team, and I feel like their schedule is one that they can probably mow through again like they did last year, but can they get good enough to compete with the teams like Howard and Platte Geddes and Hanson come playoff time? And I think they might be able to.
Yeah, and Wall was a team that surprised us a little bit early last year because they were just so young. And then there was some questions about was it their schedule or is it Wall? And then in the playoffs they proved Wall is a very, very good team. So with a bunch of those guys coming back, a more experienced team, I really expect them to be, right up there competing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the rankings whatsoever. The only thing I disagreed with, I personally put Bonhomme in the top 5. I think they're a team that's been down for a couple years. They won a championship, I believe, 3 years ago, and I think they're back. I think they've got enough talent to fill in some of those holes that they've had over the last 2 years where they could be a team to watch. But so many good teams in 9AA. We will see. In 9A, Canastota comes in as the undisputed number 1 team, getting all 21 first-place votes in the poll. They had a good week last week. They stumbled a little bit early in the game, came back and had a strong finish. Gregory, Harding County, Bison, Woolsey, Wessington, and Warner also in the top 5 to start things out. And then of those teams receiving votes, Chester looked really good. Lyman looked really good. Castlewood beat a ranked team last week, taking out DeSmet. So I think there's some depth to 9A this year. Any teams in particular that jump out to you as we talk about 9A?
Well, obviously Canastota, as you mentioned, the number 1 team. This is their first season without the co-op. Obviously Freeman, has their own team now, and Canastota obviously keeps a lot of those big name contributors that they had last year.
Ortman's
and
Tage Ortman.
So it's. They'll be a really fun team to watch throughout the year. And, I've heard a lot of really good things about Gregory, too. They got some good size. They got some good playmakers. So I expect them to be right up there, too.
Yeah, I think 9 players who have started at one point are back for Gregory, and Ryland Peck trying to take that team to the next level. Now that they're in 9A, I think they can compete for a title this year. Harding County has been down a couple of years, but now Kelby Het was injured last year. He's back with Keegan Het. And I think that's a dynamic connection that will surprise a lot of people there too. So 9A should be a lot of fun. But as we look at 9B, a lot of new teams coming into 9B this year. Just to those top 5, DeSmet, Harriet, Selby, not in 9B last year. They get to play in 9B this season, but Dallas St. Mary still stays as the number 1 team. As you look at 9B, anything come to mind for you, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Del Rapids St. Mary. They sort of just have the formula where they know what works and, what wins games. So, I feel like Harriet Selby area, like they got some playmakers that really pop. And Brendan Begeman, he's going to play, really, really well on both the defensive side and the offensive side of the ball. And then, DeSmet obviously coming down from 9A too. They lost a lot of seniors from last year, obviously. But they still got really, really good size on the line, and they got an ability to throw the ball. I mean, they're
going to surprise people, I think.
I would agree.
It might take them a few weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, they dropped their first game, but it's I think once they get the pieces together, they have DeSmet produces a lot of really good athletes, and they're going to be a team that is going to put things together towards the end of the year.
Yeah. I could not agree with you more, and I think Del St. Mary's deserves that number 1 spot for right now. But we'll see if they can keep it. They got a tough game already this week against Hamlin that could be a real challenge for them. They replace about half their team, so we'll see if that half of the team with Nick Gaspar and C.J. Smith at quarterback and Gabriel Lindemann, some real all-state type talent, can lead some of those youngsters to a challenge for a title once again. I think Harriet Selby area, we talked about losing some of those big guys up front that they've had. If they can replace those guys, they've got more than enough to make things happen on the rest of the season. And then Avon is going to be a contender. DeSmet, Hitchcock-Tulare with Eric Salmon is going to be really good as well. And Kadoka area, they've got a tough game this week too. I think they could pop into the rankings at some point this year. But the 9-man games to watch this week, of course, the one everybody's going to want to look at is Howard and Canastota, the number 1 team in 9AA against the 9A. We've got Platte Geddes, the 2-time defending champs, taking on a team that's gaining some momentum in Parkston in 9AA. We talked about Del St. Mary's, the number 1 team in 9B, taking on Hamlin, a ranked team from 9AA. In 9A, a couple of ranked teams going at it with Wellesley Wessington taking on Gregory, and then Hardin County taking on Kadoka area. Those are 2 teams out west. This will probably be the toughest game for each of those 2 teams this season. So, and then one other I just want to mention is Harriet Selby area had last week off, but opened the season against Timberlake, a team that's getting some love too. So that's a look at some of the big 9-man games coming up this week. Should be a lot of fun to see how they either keep their season going or some of them kick off their season. Tell us about what you're up to this week at the Argus Leader, Mike.
Yeah, we got a couple games going on. I'll be at Lincoln and Roosevelt on Friday, and then O'Gorman Brandon Valley on Saturday. I mean, can't ask for a better start to the season than that. I mean, it's going to be a fun weekend of watching a bunch of really good teams.
Yeah,
so
we learned so much in these first few weeks.
Oh, yeah.
But we've also been tricked before by early season teams that get better by the end of the year too. So it's always that balance of trying to figure out.
That is true, and the Lincoln Roosevelt game is one of those games where Roosevelt started. I think they lost their first 3 or 4 games of the season last year, or maybe they started 1-4. Was it?
You would have to
it was.
Look.
Yeah, they didn't have the best start to the season. Definitely not what they were hoping for. So Roosevelt could be a team that impresses but still loses. But you see the pieces coming together, and you see some of these teams potentially building something that could give them benefit later in the season.
Yeah, on Midco Sports, we have got the season premiere of Varsity Sports Live, our highlight show that comes on at 10:30 Central Time. Make sure to check that out. We've got, I think, 13 games planned from South Dakota that we'll have some reaction or highlights from. And Saturday, we've got the Midco Rushmore Bowl, something we carry every year. We're glad to sponsor the Rushmore Bowl. We get to see Washington take on Stevens, and then Sturgis take on Rapid City Central, and that's on Saturday. So looking forward to watching some teams out west. So a lot of stuff going on, and as usual, we're always looking for feedback and ideas. Hit us up on the socials. We might even add a question of the week. I think we did that last year, didn't we, Michael?
I think so. Or maybe that was for basketball. Who knows?
Well, maybe let's add it in. So if you guys have questions for us, make sure to hit us up. Otherwise, Michael McCleary for the Argus Leader. I'm Jason Andera for Midco Sports, and we'll see you on Football Insiders next week.